The plastic tray hit the bottom of the trash can with a sickening thud, followed by the wet splatter of marinara sauce, painting the metal sides red like spilled blood. Chen watched in frozen horror as her carefully packed lunch disappeared into the garbage. The homemade dumplings her grandmother had spent hours preparing, now mixing with discarded napkins and half-eaten pizza crusts. The cafeteria fell silent around her, hundreds of eyes burning into her back as the cruel laughter of three girls echoed off the walls like broken glass. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What happened next would become the stuff of legend at Westfield Academy, whispered about in hallways and shared across social media for months to come. But nobody, not even Maya herself, could have predicted how quickly a moment of humiliation would transform into something that would shake the very foundations of the school's social order. Because behind those quiet brown eyes and trembling hands lay a secret that would leave everyone, including the perpetrators, questioning everything they thought they knew about the girl they'd chosen as their target. The morning had started, like any other Tuesday at Westfield Academy, with Maya slipping through the ornate front doors just as the second bell chimed across the sprawling campus. She moved with the practiced invisibility of someone who had perfected the art of blending into crowds, her dark hair falling like a curtain across her face as she navigated the marble hallways lined with portraits of distinguished alumni. The school's reputation for academic excellence was matched only by its rigid social hierarchies, where family names and bank account balances determined one's place in the carefully constructed ecosystem of teenage politics. Maya had learned these unspoken rules during her first week at Westfield, when she'd made the mistake of sitting at the wrong table during lunch and earned herself a week of whispered comments about scholarship kids who don't know their place. The memories still stung, but it had taught her valuable lessons about staying invisible, keeping her head down, and never drawing attention to herself. Her mother worked double shifts at the local hospital to afford the partial tuition that Maya's academic scholarship didn't cover, and every day at this prestigious institution felt like a reminder of how different her world was from that of her classmates. The girl who had orchestrated that first humiliation was Brittany Walsh, a senior whose father owned half the commercial real estate in the city and whose mother sat on the school's board of directors. Brittany moved through Westfield's halls, like a queen surveying her kingdom, surrounded by a carefully curated court of followers who hung on her every word and laughed at her every joke, no matter how cruel. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her uniform always pressed to crisp perfection, and her smile always sharp enough to cut glass when she spotted someone she deemed unworthy of sharing her rarefied air. Maya had done everything possible to avoid crossing paths with Brittany since that first encounter, timing her movements between classes to minimize contact and choosing seats in the back of shared classes where she could disappear into the shadows. It had worked for the most part, allowing her to focus on her studies and maintain the grades necessary to keep her scholarship intact. But on this particular Tuesday morning, as Maya rushed to her advanced physics class with an armload of books and her grandmother's lunch carefully tucked into her backpack, fate had other plans. The collision happened at the intersection of two hallways, where the morning rush created a bottleneck of students hurrying to beat the tardy bell. Maya, running late after helping her mother with some paperwork before school, rounded the corner. At the same moment, Brittany emerged from the opposite direction with her usual entourage in tow. The impact sent Maya's books scattering across the polished floor, papers flying like confetti as she stumbled backward into the wall. Brittany's coffee, a complicated creation from the expensive cafe across the street that cost more than Maya's family spent on groceries in a day, went flying in a spectacular arc that ended with the steaming liquid splashing across the front of her designer blazer. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of the last physics textbook sliding to a stop against the wall. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she scrambled to gather her scattered belongings, mumbling apologies that felt inadequate in the face of Brittany's widening eyes and the growing crowd of onlookers. She could feel the weight of dozens of stares, some curious, some excited at the prospect of drama, and others filled with the kind of second-hand embarrassment that made people look away. The coffee stains spread across Brittany's blazer like an accusation, dark and damning against the pristine white fabric. "Are you kidding me right now?" Brittany's voice cut through the air with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, each word dripping with barely controlled rage. Her followers closed, ranks around her creating a semicircle that trapped Maya against the wall like a cornered animal. "Do you have any idea how much this blazer costs? Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Maya opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She could only stare at the stain and calculate the impossible mathematics of replacement. It costs, her mind racing through scenarios that all ended with her family's already stretched finances snapping under the weight of Brittany's anger. The blazer probably cost more than her mother made in a month, more than their rent, more than Maya could earn in a year of part-time jobs, even if Westfield's demanding academic schedule allowed for such luxuries. "I'm sorry," Maya finally managed to whisper, her voice barely audible above the growing murmur of the crowd. "I didn't mean to. I can pay for cleaning or—" Brittany's laugh was sharp and cold, cutting off Maya's desperate offer before it could fully form. "Clean it? Honey, this isn't something you clean. This is Italian wool, custom-tailored, probably worth more than your scholarship. But don't worry," she added, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the gathered crowd. "I'll think of an appropriate way for you to make this up to me." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud as the tardy bell rang, dispersing the crowd but not the tension that crackled between the two girls. Maya watched Brittany disappear down the hallway, her followers trailing behind like a pack of predators who had just identified their next prey. The scattered papers and books at Maya's feet seemed to mock her as she finally began collecting them with shaking hands, each piece of evidence of her humiliation feeling heavier than the last. Physics class passed in a blur of equations and lectures that Maya couldn't focus on, her mind replaying the collision and Brittany's parting words on an endless loop. She found herself calculating and recalculating potential costs, trying to figure out how she could possibly make things right without destroying her family's already precarious financial situation. The numbers never worked out in her favor, no matter how she adjusted the variables or hoped for mathematical miracles that existed only in textbooks. When lunch period finally arrived, Maya's stomach was tied in knots that had nothing to do with hunger. She made her way to the cafeteria with the careful steps of someone walking to their execution, knowing that whatever Brittany had planned would likely unfold in front of the largest possible audience. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The cafeteria at Westfield was a theater of social dynamics, where every table told a story about its occupant's place in the carefully constructed hierarchy of teenage society. Maya's usual spot was at a small table near the windows, far enough from the popular crowd's domain to avoid attention, but close enough to the exit for quick escapes when necessary. She unpacked her grandmother's lunch with ritualistic care, arranging the hand-folded dumplings and carefully cut vegetables like a peace offering to whatever gods governed high school social dynamics. The familiar smell of ginger and soy sauce provided a momentary comfort, a reminder of the warm kitchen where her grandmother had prepared this meal with love and hopes for Maya's success. The dumplings were a family recipe passed down through 3 generations, each fold and crimp a testament to tradition and care that couldn't be bought in any of the cafeteria's overpriced offerings. Maya's grandmother woke up early every morning to prepare these lunches, insisting that proper nutrition was essential for academic success, even when Maya protested that she could just buy cafeteria food like everyone else. But her grandmother's English was limited, and her understanding of American teenage social dynamics was even more so. She couldn't comprehend why Maya would want to hide these carefully crafted meals, or why her granddaughter sometimes came home with her lunch barely touched. As Maya bit into the first dumpling, savoring the complex blend of flavors that spoke of her family's heritage and her grandmother's love, she allowed herself a moment of hope that perhaps Brittany's threat had been empty posturing. Maybe the incident would blow over. Maybe the blazer could be cleaned after all. Maybe the social dynamics of high school would shift their focus to some other unfortunate soul who had committed some equally minor transgression. That hope died a violent death when Brittany's voice cut across the cafeteria like a blade through silk. Well, well, well. Look what we have here. Maya's blood turned to ice water in her veins as she looked up to find Brittany standing beside her table, flanked by her 2 most devoted followers, Jessica Martinez, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels, and Chloe Henderson, whose mother was a prominent surgeon and whose father sat on the city council. The 3 girls formed a triangle of intimidation around Maya's solitary table, their perfectly coordinated outfits and matching expressions of disdain, creating a wall of social superiority that felt as impenetrable as stone. The cafeteria's background chatter began to fade as nearby tables turned their attention to the unfolding drama. Maya could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes settling on her like a physical presence, each gaze adding another layer to the suffocating atmosphere that was building around her small table. Some students leaned forward in their chairs. Others pulled out their phones with the predatory instinct of sharks, sensing blood in the water. Enjoying your little lunch there. Brittany's voice carried a sweetness that was more dangerous than any outright threat, the kind of false kindness that preceded the most devastating social executions. She gestured to the carefully arranged dumplings with a manicured finger that somehow managed to convey both disgust and amusement. How ethnic. I bet your grandmother made those for you, didn't she? How sweet. Maya's hands tightened around her chopsticks as she felt the familiar burn of embarrassment creeping up her neck. She had learned to recognize the particular tone that Brittany used when she was building towards something. The way her voice got softer and more conversational right before she delivered a blow that would leave her target reeling. Maya's instincts screamed at her to pack up her lunch and leave, to find somewhere else to finish eating where she wouldn't be the center of unwanted attention. But something kept her frozen in place. Perhaps the memory of her grandmother's hands folding each dumpling with meticulous care, or the knowledge that running away would only delay the inevitable confrontation that Brittany clearly had planned. So Maya sat perfectly still, chopsticks suspended halfway to her mouth, as Brittany continued her performance for the growing audience. You know, I've been thinking about our little incident this morning, Brittany continued, her voice carrying easily across the nearby tables as conversations died away to eavesdropping silence. About my blazer and about appropriate consequences for people who don't watch where they're going, and I think I've come up with the perfect solution. Jessica and Chloe exchanged knowing glances, their expressions suggesting they were already aware of whatever plan Brittany had concocted. Maya felt her stomach drop as she recognized the particular gleam in Brittany's eyes. The same look she'd worn during the cafeteria incident that had established Maya's place in the school's social order during her first week at Westfield. See, I don't think you understand how things work around here, Brittany said, leaning down until her face was level with Maya's, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. I don't think you understand that there are consequences when scholarship kids don't show proper respect to the people who actually belong here. The words hit Maya like physical blows, each syllable designed to remind her of her place in Westfield's social hierarchy and the precarious nature of her position at the school. Maya's scholarship status wasn't officially public information, but in a place like Westfield, where family connections and financial status determined social standing, it hadn't taken long for word to spread about the girl whose mother worked as a nurse and whose grandmother didn't speak English. "So here's what's going to happen," Brittany continued, straightening up and crossing her arms over her chest in a gesture that somehow managed to convey both authority and impending doom. "You're going to learn a valuable lesson about respect, and everyone here is going to witness it. Consider it a public service announcement about the importance of knowing your place." Maya's mind raced through possible escape routes and defensive strategies, but the cafeteria layout offered no easy exits, and the growing crowd of onlookers had effectively trapped her at her table. She could see teachers on lunch duty at the far end of the room, but they were engaged in conversation and seemed oblivious to the drama unfolding in their domain. Even if she called out for help, Maya knew from experience that adult intervention at Westfield often favored the students whose families made generous donations to the school's various fundraising campaigns. "My lunch was ruined because of your clumsiness," Brittany announced, her voice rising to ensure that everyone within a 20-foot radius could hear every word. "And since you clearly can't afford to replace my blazer, I think it's only fair that your lunch should be ruined too. Don't you think that's fair, girls?" Jessica and Chloe nodded in synchronized agreement, their expressions mixing anticipation with the kind of cruel excitement that came from watching someone else's humiliation unfold. Maya could see similar expressions on faces throughout the crowd. The particular fascination that teenagers displayed when witnessing social destruction that wasn't happening to them. Maya's grandmother had always taught her that food was sacred, that every meal was a gift that shouldn't be wasted or taken for granted. She had grown up hearing stories about hunger and hardship, about times when a single dumpling was a luxury, beyond imagination. The lunch spread before her represented hours of careful preparation and a love that transcended language barriers and cultural differences. She walked toward the garbage can with measured steps, each footfall deliberate and purposeful as conversations began to die away around her. Brittany was 3 tables away, holding court with her usual audience and basking in the attention that came from a successful display of social dominance. She hadn't noticed Maya's movement yet, too caught up in describing her morning's triumph to Jessica and Chloe, who were hanging on every word like devoted disciples receiving wisdom from their queen. Maya reached the garbage can and looked down at the sad remains of her grandmother's careful preparation. The dumplings, now mixed with ketchup packets and discarded pizza crusts in a tableau of casual waste and disrespect. For a moment, the anger threatened to overwhelm her training, the careful control that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of practice and meditation. But then, her instructor's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that true power came not from anger, but from the focused application of skill and will in service of justice. Maya had never used her training outside the controlled environment of the dojo, had never needed to apply the lessons she had learned to real-world situations involving real consequences. But as she stared at the garbage can that held the remnants of her family's love and sacrifice, Maya realized that some things were worth fighting for, even if that fight came with risks she couldn't fully calculate or control. Brittany Walsh was about to learn that there were consequences for cruelty, regardless of how much power and privilege she thought protected her from accountability. Maya turned away from the garbage can and began walking toward Brittany's table, her movement catching the attention of students who had witnessed the earlier confrontation. Conversation stopped as people recognized the particular quality of Maya's approach, the controlled calm that suggested something significant was about to happen. Brittany looked up as Maya approached, her expression shifting from amusement to puzzlement as she registered the change in her victim's demeanor. The girl walking toward her table bore little resemblance to the stammering, apologetic figure who had spilled coffee on her blazer that morning. This version of Maya Chen moved with purpose and confidence that seemed to fill the space around her, drawing attention and creating an atmosphere of anticipation that spread through the nearby tables like ripples on water. "Can I help you with something?" Brittany asked, her voice carrying the tone of someone annoyed by an unexpected interruption to her moment of social triumph. She glanced at Jessica and Chloe, who wore matching expressions of confusion as they tried to process this unexpected development in what should have been a closed chapter of cafeteria drama. Maya stopped directly in front of Brittany's table, close enough that her presence couldn't be ignored, but far enough away to avoid seeming immediately threatening. Her posture was perfectly balanced, weight distributed evenly between both feet, in a stance that looked casual to untrained eyes, but would have been immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with martial arts as a position of readiness. "Yes," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly across the sudden silence that had fallen over the nearby tables. "You can clean up the mess you made." The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down between medieval knights, simple and direct, and impossible to misunderstand. Brittany's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise as she processed what she had just heard, her mind struggling to reconcile this confident demand with her expectations of how scholarship students were supposed to respond to social correction. "Excuse me." Brittany's voice carried a dangerous edge, the tone of someone who wasn't accustomed to having her authority questioned by people she considered beneath her notice. "I think you're confused about how this works. You don't get to make demands here." Maya's expression remained perfectly calm, but something in her eyes had changed in a way that made several nearby students lean forward in their chairs with the instinctive recognition that they were witnessing something unprecedented. The quiet girl with the homemade lunch was staring down the school's most powerful bully, with a confidence that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than teenage bravado or desperate defiance. "I'm not confused," Maya said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made people listen without understanding why. "You threw away my grandmother's food. You're going to clean it up and apologize, right now." The demand was so unexpected, so completely outside the normal parameters of Westfield Academy's social dynamics, that for a moment nobody knew how to respond. Brittany stared at Maya as if she had suddenly started speaking a foreign language, while Jessica and Chloe exchanged glances that mixed confusion with the beginning stirrings of concern, because something fundamental had shifted in the balance of power at Maya's table. Something that went beyond the usual calculations of social status and family connections. The girl standing before them radiated a kind of controlled confidence that suggested she was operating from an entirely different playbook than the one that governed normal teenage conflicts. And as Brittany opened her mouth to deliver what would undoubtedly be a crushing response designed to put this upstart scholarship student back in her proper place, she had no idea that she was about to discover exactly what happened when someone pushed Maya Chen too far. The quiet girl with the black belt was about to show Westfield Academy that some lines should never be crossed, and that respect was something that could be demanded as well as given. The cafeteria held its breath as two very different worldviews prepared to collide, unaware that they were about to witness something that would become legend in the halls of Westfield Academy for years to come. Brittany's laughter cut through, the tension like broken glass, sharp and ugly in the cathedral silence of the cafeteria. Her head tilted back in genuine amusement as she processed Maya's demand, the sound drawing even more attention from students who had initially missed the confrontation but were now craning their necks to see what could possibly be funny enough. to produce such theatrical mirth from the school's reigning social queen. "Oh my God," Brittany gasped between peals of laughter, wiping at her eyes with perfectly manicured fingers. Did you actually just demand that I apologize to you? This is rich. This is absolutely rich." She turned to Jessica and Chloe, who were staring at Maya with expressions that mixed disbelief with growing concern. "Can you believe this? Little scholarship girl thinks she can give me orders." Maya remained perfectly still, her breathing controlled, and even despite the pounding of her heart against her ribs. 5 years of meditation and discipline had taught her to find the eye of any storm, to locate that place of perfect calm where decisions could be made without the interference of emotion or ego. She watched Brittany's performance with the detached interest of someone studying a particularly fascinating specimen, noting the forced nature of the laughter and the way her followers' expressions were beginning to shift from amusement to uncertainty. "Please," Maya whispered, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Please don't." But Brittany's smile only widened at the plea, her eyes lighting up with the particular satisfaction that came from confirming her power over someone who couldn't fight back. "Oh, but I think I will," she said, reaching across the table with theatrical slowness. "I think everyone here needs to see what happens when people don't show proper respect." Maya watched in helpless horror as Brittany's perfectly manicured fingers closed around the edge of her lunch tray, lifting it with the deliberate care of someone performing for an audience. The dumplings, still warm from her grandmother's kitchen, sat nestled in their container like small works of art, each fold and pleat a testament to generations of culinary tradition and family love. The cafeteria held its collective breath as Brittany raised the tray higher, her movements slow and deliberate enough to allow every phone camera to capture the moment for posterity. Maya could see the gleam of recording lights in her peripheral vision, dozens of devices pointed in her direction, like the eyes of electronic vultures waiting to feast on her humiliation. "This," Brittany announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never doubted her right to exercise power over others, "is what happens when you don't know your place." And with those words, she turned the tray upside down and watched as Maya's carefully prepared lunch tumbled into the garbage can beside their table. The dumplings hit the metal bottom with soft thuds, followed by the plastic containers and chopsticks that had completed Maya's humble meal. The sound seemed to echo through the suddenly silent cafeteria like gunshots, each impact driving home the finality of the moment and the completeness of Maya's public humiliation. Maya stared at the garbage can, where her lunch now lay buried. Beneath discarded napkins and half-eaten cafeteria food, her mind struggling to process the casual cruelty she had just witnessed. Somewhere in the back of her thoughts, she could hear her grandmother's voice asking about her day, wondering if she had enjoyed the dumplings that had been prepared with such care and hope for her granddaughter's success at the prestigious school. The laughter started slowly, a ripple of nervous giggles from Jessica and Chloe that gradually spread through the crowd like a contagious disease. Some students looked uncomfortable with what they had witnessed, but their discomfort was drowned out by the cruel amusement of others who found entertainment in Maya's public destruction. Phone cameras continued to record every second of her reaction, capturing the moment for later sharing and commentary across social media platforms. Brittany brushed her hands together in a gesture of finality, her expression mixing satisfaction with the kind of casual dismissal reserved for people who had served their purpose as entertainment. "I hope you learned something today," she said, her voice carrying the tone of a teacher delivering a moral lesson. "Maybe next time you'll watch where you're going." Maya sat frozen at her empty table, surrounded by the evidence of her humiliation and the continued attention of students who were slowly beginning to return to their own conversations and concerns. The immediate drama was over, but she knew the aftermath would linger for days or weeks, shared and reshared across digital platforms, until her moment of powerlessness became a permanent part of her reputation at Westfield Academy. But as Maya stared at the garbage can that held the remains of her grandmother's loving preparation, something began to shift deep within her chest. The initial shock and humiliation were giving way to something else, something that had been buried beneath. Years of keeping her head down and avoiding confrontation. The feeling grew slowly at first, like an ember being fed oxygen, until it became a flame that threatened to consume the careful control she had maintained over her emotions and reactions. Because Brittany Walsh had made a critical miscalculation in her choice of target and her method of attack. She had assumed that Maya Chen was just another scholarship student who would accept humiliation as the price of attending a school above her social station. She had no way of knowing about the hours Maya spent in a converted warehouse across town, or about the discipline and focus that had been drilled into her since childhood, or about the particular code of honor that governed her response to disrespect and cruelty. Maya's hands remained perfectly still on the empty table, but her breathing had changed in ways that would have been recognizable to anyone familiar with the controlled calm that preceded explosive action. Her grandmother had taught her to fold dumplings with precise movements and infinite patience, but her other instructor had taught her entirely different lessons about precision and patience, and the moment when action became inevitable. The cafeteria continued its normal rhythm around her, students finishing their lunches and preparing for afternoon classes, unaware that they had just witnessed something far more significant than a simple case of cafeteria bullying. They had no way of knowing that Maya Chen's 5 years of intensive martial arts training had taught her not just physical techniques, but mental disciplines that allowed her to remain perfectly calm while calculating the most effective response to any given situation. And as Brittany Walsh walked away from Maya's table with her followers trailing behind like a royal procession, she had no idea that her casual cruelty had just awakened something in her victim that would transform the social dynamics of Westfield Academy in ways that no one could have predicted. The quiet girl with the scholarship and the homemade lunch was about to show everyone exactly what happened when someone pushed too far against the wrong person. Maya's eyes remained fixed on the garbage can as she began to count her breaths, using the meditative techniques that her instructor had drilled into her during countless hours of training. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 4, each cycle bringing her closer to the state of focused calm that preceded decisive action. The cafeteria noise faded into background static as her awareness narrowed to the immediate moment and the choice that lay before her. She could walk away, just as she had been trained to do by years of keeping her head down and avoiding confrontation. She could gather her empty containers and endure the lingering stares and whispered comments, adding this humiliation to the collection of slights and cruelties that came with being different in a place like Westfield Academy. She could go home, to her grandmother's concerned questions and her mother's worried glances, carrying the weight of another day survived in the hostile territory of elite education. Or she could stand up. The thought was simple and clear, cutting through the complex calculations of social politics and potential consequences like a blade through silk. Maya had spent 5 years learning not just how to fight, but when to fight. And every lesson she had absorbed about honor and respect and the protection of things sacred was telling her that this moment had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Her grandmother's dumplings weren't just food. They were love made tangible, tradition passed down through generations, and pride in heritage that deserved respect rather than ridicule. Brittany Walsh had thrown away more than lunch when she upended that tray. She had discarded everything Maya's family had sacrificed to give her a chance at success, every early morning and late night that had made her scholarship possible, every open dream that had been carefully folded into those handmade meals. Maya's breathing steadied as she made her decision. Her 5 years of training had taught her that true strength wasn't about avoiding conflict, but about choosing the right moment to act with precision and purpose. And as she looked around the cafeteria at the students who had watched her humiliation, with entertainment rather than outrage, she realized that this moment wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every scholarship student who had learned to accept disrespect as the price of opportunity. It was about every person who had been made to feel small because their lunch didn't come from an expensive restaurant or their clothes didn't carry designer labels. It was about the fundamental principle that cruelty should have consequences, regardless of who had the money and connections to avoid them. Maya stood up from her table with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting controlled movement, her actions drawing renewed attention from nearby students who sensed that the drama might not be over after all. "You think this is funny?" Maya asked, her voice carrying a quality that made several nearby students stop their conversations entirely. There was something in her tone that didn't match her small stature or her quiet reputation, something that spoke of depths that nobody at Westfield Academy had ever suspected existed beneath the surface of the scholarship girl who kept to herself. Brittany's laughter faltered slightly as she registered the change in Maya's demeanor. The trembling, apologetic girl from the morning collision had been replaced by someone who stood with the kind of balanced stillness that athletes and performers recognized as the precursor to explosive action. But Brittany was neither an athlete nor a performer, and her understanding of power dynamics was limited to the social hierarchies that had always favored her family's wealth and connections. "Funny?" Brittany repeated, her voice taking on the cutting edge that had silenced countless victims over the years. "What's funny is watching some nobody from nowhere think she can challenge me. What's funny is you standing there making demands like you have any power here at all." She stood up from her chair with theatrical slowness, using her height advantage to tower over Maya in a display of physical intimidation that had worked countless times before. Maya tilted her head slightly as she studied Brittany's posture, automatically cataloguing the older girl's stance and balance with the clinical assessment that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training. Brittany stood with all her weight on her back foot, knees locked, center of gravity too high for stability. Her hands were loose at her sides, fingers soft and uncalloused from a lifetime of manicures and moisturizers. Everything about her positioning screamed amateur to Maya's trained eye, someone who had never faced real physical confrontation and had no idea how to handle herself if words and social pressure failed to achieve the desired result. "You want to know what's really funny?" Brittany continued, stepping closer to Maya in a move designed to force her to back down or retreat. "What's funny is that you actually think your grandmother's little rice balls matter to anyone here. What's funny is that you think anyone cares about your feelings or your precious family traditions or whatever sob story brought you to this school." The words were designed to cut deep, to strike at the core of Maya's identity and family pride, in ways that would leave lasting wounds long after the physical confrontation ended. Brittany had perfected the art of psychological warfare over years of practice, learning exactly which buttons to push to reduce her victims to tears or flight. She had no way of knowing that Maya's training had included mental conditioning as rigorous as the physical techniques, meditation practices designed to maintain clarity and focus even under extreme stress. Maya's instructor had taught her that true strength came not from the absence of emotion, but from the ability to feel everything while maintaining perfect control over her responses. She could feel the anger burning in her chest like molten metal, but she could also feel the steady rhythm of her breathing and the perfect balance of her stance. The fury was fuel, not fire, energy to be channeled rather than emotion to be suppressed. "Those weren't rice balls," Maya said quietly. her voice carrying clearly despite its soft volume. "They were dumplings. My grandmother makes them every morning before work, because she wants me to succeed here. She gets up at 4:30 to prepare my lunch because she believes education is the most important gift she can give me." Brittany rolled her eyes in exaggerated boredom, but several students within earshot were beginning to look uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation was taking. There was something unsettling about watching someone's family traditions and cultural heritage being mocked so casually, even for students who had grown accustomed to Brittany's casual cruelty. "How touching," Brittany said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "A real hallmark moment. But here's the thing you don't seem to understand, scholarship girl. Your grandmother's feelings don't matter here. Your little cultural traditions don't matter here. You don't matter here. You're only here because this school needs a few charity cases to make the board feel good about themselves." Maya nodded slowly, as if seriously considering Brittany's words. "You're right about one thing," she said, her tone conversational and calm. "My grandmother's feelings don't matter to you. My family's traditions don't matter to you, but they matter to me. And when you threw away her food, you showed me exactly what you think of everything my family has sacrificed to get me here." Something in Maya's tone was beginning to penetrate Brittany's confidence, a quality that suggested this conversation was heading somewhere unexpected. Jessica and Chloe were exchanging increasingly worried glances, their instincts telling them that the script they were familiar with was somehow going off track in ways they couldn't predict or control. "So here's what's going to happen," Maya continued, taking a single step closer to Brittany. The movement looked casual, almost insignificant, but it shifted the dynamic between them in subtle ways that made several martial arts students in the crowd sit up straighter in recognition. "You're going to walk over to that trash can, you're going to clean up the mess you made, and you're going to apologize for disrespecting my family." Brittany's face flushed red with indignation at the continued defiance. She had never encountered a victim who refused to back down after the full application of her social pressure and psychological intimidation. Every previous target had either fled in tears or crumpled under the weight of public humiliation, accepting their place in Westfield's hierarchy with the resigned submission that came from recognizing superior power. "Or what?" Brittany demanded, stepping even closer to Maya until they were separated by less than arm's length. "What exactly do you think you're going to do if I don't? Run crying to the administration? They won't help you. My family practically built this school. Or maybe you'll call your mommy to come save you. Oh, wait. She's probably too busy emptying bedpans at the hospital to care about your little problems." Dumb. The insult about her mother crossed a line that Maya hadn't even realized existed until she felt something shift deep within her chest. Her breathing remained controlled, her posture unchanged, but something fundamental had altered in the quality of her presence. Students who were sensitive to such things found themselves leaning back in their chairs without understanding why, responding to a change they couldn't name but could definitely feel. Maya's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more authority than any shout could have managed. "You know what I think?" she said, her words cutting through the ambient noise of the cafeteria like a blade through silk. "I think you've never had anyone tell you no in your entire life. I think you've never faced real consequences for your actions because your daddy's money has always been there to make problems disappear." Brittany's eyes narrowed at the shift in Maya's tone, finally beginning to register that something had changed in the dynamic between them. But her understanding of power was so limited to social and financial leverage that she had no framework for recognizing the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of physical training and mental discipline. "And I think," Maya continued, her voice taking on a quality that made conversations stop at tables throughout the cafeteria, "that you're about to learn what happens when you pick on someone who actually knows how to fight back." What happened next would be replayed thousands of times across social media platforms, analyzed frame by students who wanted to understand exactly how a confrontation that had seemed so one-sided could reverse itself so completely and so quickly. Maya's movement was poetry in motion, a perfect demonstration of how years of disciplined training could be applied in real-world situations with devastating effectiveness. Her right hand shot out faster than thought, fingers closing around Brittany's designer blazer with a grip that combined precision with unmistakable authority. Before Brittany could react or pull away, Maya had stepped into a position that placed her hip against Brittany's center of gravity, while her free hand found the perfect leverage point at Brittany's shoulder. The throw that followed was a masterpiece of applied physics, using Brittany's own momentum and body weight against her in ways that made resistance impossible. Brittany found herself airborne for what felt like an eternity, but was actually less than 2 seconds, her perfectly styled hair flying around her face as she experienced the unique sensation of being completely helpless in 3-dimensional space. Her expensive shoes kicked frantically at empty air as she rotated through an arc that ended with her landing squarely in the garbage can where Maya's lunch had been discarded, her legs sticking up comically as the metal container rocked back and forth from the impact. The silence that followed was absolute and profound, broken only by the sound of Brittany's muffled struggles as she attempted to extract herself from her humiliating position. Hundreds of students sat frozen in their chairs, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The quiet scholarship girl had just demonstrated combat skills that belonged in action movies rather than high school cafeterias, transforming the social dynamics of Westfield Academy in the span of a single fluid motion. Phone cameras that had been recording the verbal confrontation suddenly became invaluable documentation of what would undoubtedly become the most legendary moment in the school's history. Every angle was captured, every second preserved for posterity as Maya stood perfectly balanced beside the overturned trash can, her breathing controlled, and even as if she had just completed a routine classroom exercise rather than performed what amounted to a public execution of Brittany's social supremacy. Jessica and Chloe finally broke free from their shock-induced paralysis and rushed to help their fallen leader, grabbing Brittany's legs and pulling her free from the garbage can with undignified haste. Brittany emerged covered in lunch debris and righteous fury, her perfect hair now resembling a bird's nest, and her designer blazer decorated with stains that would require professional cleaning to remove. "You psycho!" Brittany screamed, her voice cracking with indignation and disbelief as she struggled to process what had just happened to her. "You absolute psycho! Do you know what you just did? Do you have any idea what you just did?" Maya tilted her head slightly, studying Brittany's disheveled appearance with the clinical interest of someone examining the results of a successful experiment. "I put you where you put my grandmother's food," she said calmly, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone explaining basic cause and effect. Seemed appropriate under the circumstances. The response sent a ripple of nervous laughter through the crowd, students covering their mouths to hide smiles as they processed the perfect symmetry of Maya's revenge. Brittany had thrown Maya's lunch in the trash, and Maya had responded by putting Brittany in the trash. The poetic justice was so perfect it seemed scripted, though everyone present knew they were witnessing something completely spontaneous and unrehearsed. But Maya wasn't finished. She walked over to where Brittany's expensive lunch sat abandoned, on her table, picking up the artisanal salad and imported water that probably cost more than Maya's family spent on groceries in a week. For a moment, the crowd held its breath, expecting Maya to dump the expensive food over Brittany's head in a final act of retribution. Instead, Maya carefully set the tray down on a nearby table and stepped back with her hands raised in a gesture of peaceful intent. "But I'm not going to waste your food," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent cafeteria. Because I was raised to understand that throwing away food is disrespectful, no matter whose food it is or how angry you might be. The moral contrast was stark and unmistakable, highlighting the difference between Maya's principled response and Brittany's casual cruelty in ways that needed no explanation. Students throughout the cafeteria found themselves reassessing what they had witnessed, recognizing that Maya's actions were guided by a code of ethics that went deeper than simple revenge or retaliation. Brittany looked around the cafeteria with wild eyes, taking in the hundreds of phone cameras pointed in her direction and the expressions of barely contained amusement on faces that had always shown her nothing but deference and respect. For the first time in her privileged life, she was the target of mockery rather than the source of it, the subject of embarrassing footage rather than the producer of it. "You're done," she declared, her voice shaking with rage as she pointed an accusing finger at Maya while trying to extract pieces of lettuce from her hair. "You are so done at this school. My father is going to destroy you. He's going to make sure you never set foot on another campus anywhere in this state. Your scholarship is gone, your future is gone, your whole family is going to pay for what you just did to me." Maya listened to the threats with the same calm attention she had given to Brittany's earlier taunts, weighing each word and calculating the likelihood that any of them would prove meaningful in the long term. Her instructor had taught her that bullies always escalated to bigger threats when their initial intimidation tactics failed. But he had also taught her that people who relied on others' power were fundamentally weak when stripped of their external support systems. "You know what?" Maya said, her voice taking on a conversational tone that somehow made her words more unsettling than any angry response could have been. "I'm sure your father is very powerful. I'm sure he has lots of influence and connections that could make life difficult for someone like me." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing with the same calm certainty that had characterized her entire performance. "But right now, your father isn't here, your money isn't here. Your connections can't help you right now. Right now, it's just you and me and the mess you made." Maya gestured toward the scattered debris around the garbage can, the physical evidence of both Brittany's cruelty and her own dramatic comeuppance. "So you have a choice," she continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone presenting a reasonable business proposition. "You can clean up that mess and apologize for disrespecting my family, and maybe people will remember you as someone who was capable of learning from her mistakes." She looked around the cafeteria, taking in the hundreds of students who were documenting every word and gesture with their devices. "Or you can refuse, and people will remember you as the girl who thought it was funny to waste food and mock someone's grandmother, right up until she got taught a lesson she'll never forget." The choice was elegant in its simplicity, offering Brittany a path toward redemption, while making it clear that refusal would carry social consequences that might prove more damaging than any physical confrontation. Maya had turned the entire dynamic of the situation on its head, transforming herself from victim to moral authority while casting Brittany in the role of someone who needed to earn forgiveness. Brittany looked around the cafeteria desperately, searching for support or intervention from teachers, administrators, or even fellow students who might be willing to step in on her behalf. But the faculty members on lunch duty had mysteriously disappeared, probably called away to deal with some convenient administrative emergency that would keep them out of the cafeteria until after the confrontation resolved itself one way or another. And the students, who had always been eager to curry favor with Brittany when she was dispensing social rewards or punishments, now seemed content to watch her humiliation unfold without offering any assistance. Their phones remained pointed in her direction, capturing every moment of her degradation for later sharing and commentary across the digital networks that connected Westfield Academy to the broader world of teenage social dynamics. "I'm not cleaning anything," Brittany declared, but her voice lacked the authority it had carried earlier. The garbage can incident had stripped away more than just her dignity. It had revealed the fundamental powerlessness that lay beneath her social armor when faced with someone who refused to be intimidated by wealth and connections. Maya nodded, as if she had expected this response, then walked back toward the garbage, a can with purposeful steps that made the crowd lean forward in anticipation. She knelt down beside the scattered debris and began methodically collecting the remains of her grandmother's lunch. Each piece handled with the careful respect that Brittany had denied it earlier. "That's okay," Maya said quietly as she worked, her voice carrying easily through the hushed cafeteria. "I'll clean it up myself. I've been cleaning up other people's messes my whole life. One more won't make much difference." But as Maya stood, up with her hands full of garbage, something in her posture shifted in ways that made Brittany take an involuntary step backward. The peaceful cleaning had been a demonstration, not a surrender, and the look in Maya's eyes suggested that her patience had finally reached its limit. "But you know what?" Maya continued, her voice taking on that dangerous quality that had preceded her earlier action. "I'm tired of cleaning up messes that other people made because they thought I was too weak to make them clean up their own. I'm tired of being polite to people who think my family's traditions are funny. And I'm especially tired of watching privileged bullies get away with cruelty because they think their money makes them untouchable." Maya dropped the debris back into the garbage can and turned to face Brittany with the kind of focused intensity that made everyone in the immediate vicinity suddenly aware that they were witnessing something significant. "So here's what's going to happen," she said, her words carrying the finality of someone who had run out of patience for negotiation. "You're going to walk over here, you're going to get down on your knees, and you're going to clean up every single piece of food you scattered when you threw away my lunch. Then you're going to apologize to me, to my grandmother, and to everyone else you've ever bullied in this cafeteria. And if you refuse, I'm going to help you into that garbage can again. And this time, I might not be in such a hurry to help you. Get out." The ultimatum was delivered with such matter-of-fact certainty that it carried more weight than any shouted threat could have managed. Maya spoke as if she was simply describing a natural law, something as inevitable as gravity or thermodynamics, rather than a choice that Brittany could refuse to accept. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the cafeteria doors bursting open as Principal Harrison strode into the room with the purposeful gait of someone who had been summoned to deal with an emergency. His expression mixed concern, with the kind of preemptive damage control that experienced administrators developed when dealing with situations that might reflect poorly on their institutions. But before the principal could take control of the situation, something unexpected happened. A voice from the crowd called out, "Make her apologize!" followed by another student shouting, "Clean it up, Brittany!" Within moments, the entire cafeteria had erupted in a chant that echoed off the walls like thunder. "Clean it up! Clean it up! Clean it up!" Hundreds of students who had suffered under Brittany's reign of terror, who had watched her humiliate others without consequence, who had accepted her cruelty as an inevitable part of their daily lives, suddenly found their voices united in demanding accountability. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Principal Harrison looked around the cafeteria with wide eyes, taking in the scene of hundreds of students demanding justice from one of the school's most prominent family's children. This wasn't the kind of situation that administrative protocols had prepared him to handle, and his expression suggested that he was rapidly calculating the political implications of whatever decision he made next. Brittany stood frozen in the center of the chaos, her face cycling through expressions of shock, fear, and dawning comprehension as she realized that her social empire had collapsed completely in the span of a single lunch period. The crowd that had always deferred to her authority, was now demanding her humiliation, and there was no escape route that wouldn't involve further public degradation. Maya raised her hand, and incredibly, the chanting stopped immediately. The sudden silence was even more powerful than the noise had been, demonstrating that the social dynamics of Westfield Academy had shifted so completely that a scholarship student now commanded more respect than the daughter of the school's biggest, Udona. "The choice is still yours," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying easily through the expectant hush. "You can do the right thing voluntarily, or you can make this even more difficult for yourself. But either way, you're going to clean up that mess and apologize for what you did." Brittany looked around the cafeteria one final time, taking in the sea of faces that had turned against her and the recording devices that would document whatever happened next for eternal digital posterity. Her shoulders sagged in defeat as she finally understood that her options had been reduced to choosing between different levels of humiliation, rather than different outcomes entirely. "Fine," she whispered, the word barely audible above the ambient tension that filled the room. "Fine, I'll do it." What followed was perhaps the most cathartic moment in Westfield Academy's cafeteria history, as the school's most feared bully knelt beside a garbage can, picking up scattered food debris, while hundreds of students documented her comeuppance with their phones. Brittany moved with mechanical precision, her face burning with shame as she gathered up the remnants of Maya's lunch under the watchful eyes of her former victims. Maya stood nearby, not gloating or taunting, but simply observing with the calm attention of someone ensuring that justice was properly served. Her restraint was perhaps more devastating than any verbal abuse could have been, demonstrating a level of self-control and maturity that made Brittany's earlier behavior seem even more petty and childish by comparison. When the cleanup was finally complete, Brittany rose to her feet with as much dignity as she could muster, her designer uniform still stained and her perfect hair still disheveled from her earlier encounter with the garbage can. She looked at Maya with an expression that mixed hatred with something that might have been grudging respect, the recognition that she had been outmaneuvered by someone she had completely underestimated. "I'm sorry," Brittany said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly through the silent cafeteria. "I'm sorry for throwing away your lunch and making fun of your grandmother's cooking. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Maya nodded gravely, accepting the apology with the same dignity she had maintained throughout the entire confrontation. "Thank you," she said simply. "That's all I wanted." But the impact of what had happened went far beyond a simple apology between two students. As Principal Harrison finally stepped forward to restore order, he found himself dealing with a fundamentally transformed social environment where the old hierarchies had been shattered and new ones were already beginning to form. In the days that followed, the video of Maya's confrontation with Brittany spread across social media platforms with viral intensity, viewed millions of times by people who found inspiration in watching someone stand up to institutional bullying with courage and skill. Maya became an overnight sensation, fielding interview requests from news outlets and receiving scholarship offers from colleges that had never heard of her before. But perhaps more importantly, the culture at Westfield Academy began to change in ways that went beyond any single incident or individual. Students who had previously accepted bullying as an inevitable part of their educational experience found the courage to report harassment and stand up for their peers. Teachers and administrators, faced with clear evidence of the toxic dynamics that had flourished under their watch, implemented new policies and training programs designed to create a more inclusive environment. Brittany, meanwhile, found herself navigating a social landscape where her family's wealth and connections no longer provided automatic immunity from consequences. She was suspended for a week following the incident, and when she returned, she discovered that her former followers had largely abandoned her in favor of aligning themselves with the new power structures that were emerging in Maya's wake. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete, but it was real and lasting. Maya had proven that individual courage could catalyze broader social change, that standing up to injustice could inspire others to examine their own behavior and choices. Her willingness to risk everything to defend her family's dignity had created ripple effects that touched every corner of Westfield Academy's community. Years later, when Maya was studying at an Ivy League university on a full scholarship funded by admirers of her viral confrontation, she would reflect on that lunch period as the moment when she truly understood the power of principled action. Her grandmother's dumplings had been more than just food. They had been a symbol of love, tradition, and the sacrifices that families make for their children's futures. Defending them had required her to reveal skills and strength she had kept hidden. But in doing so, she had discovered that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the personal cost. The lesson resonated far beyond the walls of Westfield Academy, inspiring countless others who face their own bullies and injustices to find the courage to stand up and demand the respect that every person deserved. Maya's story became a reminder that true power didn't come from money or connections or social status, but from the willingness to act with integrity and courage when it mattered most. And in cafeterias and classrooms around the world, students who had grown tired of watching cruelty go unchallenged found themselves asking the question that would define a generation. What would Maya do? The answer, more often than not, was simple. She would stand up, speak out, and remind everyone that dignity was not something that could be bought, sold, or thrown away like garbage. It was something that had to be earned through action, defended through courage, and shared through compassion. The quiet girl with the black belt had shown them all what was possible when someone refused to accept that the way things were was the way things had to be. And in doing so, she had changed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone who witnessed her moment of truth and found the inspiration to create their own. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.